Hi everyone, I'm Teddy. I'm a software engineer at dYdX. And today I'm here to talk about the dYdX MemClob, as well as how we're trying to integrate it with CosmWasm. So to start with, what is the MemClob? The MemClob is a dYdX order book. As the name suggests, mem means in memory. Clob means central limit order book. So it's just dYdX implementation of the order book, which is in memory, but also we find a way to put it on chain. So before we talk about this particular design, I want to share some key observations from dYdX v3. So for some historical context, dYdX has multiple versions. v3 is a hybrid decentralized exchange, non-custodial, that is onto Ethereum on a StarkX layer 2. It has a centralized experience. It has a centralized exchange experience because it has a centralized order matching service. And the metrics that we observe from v3 is that only about 1% of all orders actually gets matched. This means that the other 99% of the orders just ends up sitting on the order book, and oftentimes they just don't, like their entire life cycle is just sitting on there, not contributing to any actual state changes, and then they often also just expire pretty often. So this brings us to the second observation, which is that high-frequency traders and market makers typically place very short-lived orders on the book. And sometimes these can expire within just a matter of seconds. And compared to that, retail users have a very different pattern of orders, where the orders, you can place a limit orders or like triggerable orders that expire within the next week or a month or something, right? So very quickly, you start to realize that these are two different pattern of placing orders, which we'll try to optimize separately. So and obviously, it's wasteful to commit every order placement on chain from these observations. So now moving on to v4, the long-term goal for v4 is to be able to basically have unbounded throughput on order placements, not matching, but on order placement. And this is because the long-term kind of product vision for v4 is that there will be permissionless kind of Uniswap style perpetual market listing, where you can basically list a perpetual market on anything that has an Oracle price, right? So the conclusion with these observations and the goal is that we decided to build a hybrid MemClob supporting both on-chain and off-chain orders. So let's talk about the two hybrid order types. The first is off-chain. We also call them short-term orders. They use a go-to block semantics. So these typically have a pretty short window. The protocol enforces a 20 blocks in the future. Limitations basically mean that you should only be placing very short-term orders. Right? They're only included in a block if they're involved in a match. Again, 1%, as we discussed before. They're gasless, just like central exchange. And they're primarily used by high-frequency traders and market makers to provide liquidity, right? And also market orders from the retail users, because market orders are usually immediate or cancel, and therefore it doesn't make sense for these orders to be on-chain. So the next we have on-chain orders, and we call them long-term orders. Because they're more long-term, right? They're for retail users. They have a good till block time or good till time enforced semantics, just like your usual central exchange orders. They're always included in a block. They're gasless as well, and they're primarily used by retail limit orders, triggerable orders, and also if you're a market maker, if you want to have some guarantee on your orders, you can also use this as well. So bringing these two orders together, we have the optimistic matching algorithm, which is how the MemClob basically works. So talking in terms of the ABCI lifecycle in the CosmWasm SDK and CheckDX, as soon as a validator receives an order, it just tries to match the order optimistically based on its local MemClob, right? So matched orders are stored into local operations queue. This just means that I think that these orders are going to be matched. This continuous order book state can actually observe by a full node and stream to subscribing parties, be it market makers, be it high-frequency traders. It turns out that this continuous kind of order book state, even though it's optimistic, is still very important to them for their trading experience, even though that the actual kind of state changes happens on a discrete time horizon. So this means that each node has their own local view of the order book, which is the MemClob. So in perpetual proposal, which is where the proposer decides what to put in the block, it's actually quite trivial. You just attach the local operations that you get from CheckDX and then just put it in the block. And now in finalized block, which is where everybody processes this proposed block, everybody just kind of deterministically process this operations from the proposer. This include the matches, this include all their on-chain order placements, and this is executed and settled on-chain. During this process, importantly, memclock is not involved. So there's two basically separate process with the off-chain order book, and there's this on-chain kind of settlement process. And to kind of reconcile these two states, during prepare check state, which is at the very end of the block where the nodes prepare the check state for the next block, each non-proposer, because their local memclob already kind of diverged from the on-chain state, they have to reconcile their memclob with the on-chain state. So this is actually quite complicated. It's kind of painful to implement. But on a high level, it involves like replaying an order, kind of uncrossing the order book to maintain that order book is in a valid kind of state. Okay. All right. So to put that more concretely, let's talk about the life cycle of an off-chain order. So the transaction gets broadcast to full nodes, just like any other transaction to the network. Transaction gets gossiped to the proposer. On the proposer in check.tx, the proposer just attempts to match the order optimistically against its memclock state. If this generates a match, then this pair of orders, both the taker and the matcher, are then attached in the block and proposed on-chain. And the chain and the on-chain state is just kind of process that deterministically and settles it with like all the balance changes and everything. If there's no match, the order is then placed onto the memclob, just like a regular like order book, as a maker order. And then it can be matched with future orders during check.tx. So this could be during the same block, right? Where like if you first have an order that comes in, it doesn't match with the order book, you place it on the book, and then if there's another order in the book that in the same block that match with the order, then these two can generate a match during the same block. Or if it doesn't generate any order during the same block, which again is the majority of the cases, it just gets put on the memclob, and then in the future it can potentially be matched again. Okay, so that's kind of a brief summary of how the memclob works. Here I'm going to talk briefly about NDV. This is a pretty interesting and complicated topic. We have a full research team dedicated to kind of understanding this better. Here I'm going to give a very brief summary. So there's two types of NDVs that exist on dYdX. The first is intra-block NDV, which exists on any kind of any kind of decentralized exchange. This happens where the proposer can either censor an order, reorder an order in a way that it benefits their particular kind of, it makes profit for themselves, right? So this can be mitigated by frequent batch auctions, but this will always exist to some extent in the leader-based consensus because your proposer can just censor orders. So one of the ways that's currently live to kind of mitigate this is there's this MEV metrics dashboard, actually built by the Skip team. Huge shout out to them. So this is something that built into the underlying software, which any honest full node can use to measure the match discrepancy between the block proposer's match order and the full node's local order book view, right? So any honest full nodes can run this, and there's an MEV community appointed by the community that currently publishes data on V4. So that's intra-block MVV. Now let's move on to intra-block MVV, which is kind of unique to dYdX chain. Because short-term orders are never committed on chain, hypothetically, a malicious proposer can pretend to see, basically pretend that they never saw previous short-term orders, right? And they can censor and reorder them, just like the intra-block orders. So to combat this, firstly, we have to note that retail users mainly use on-chain orders to guarantee the placement cancels, right? So primarily this problem is limited to kind of high-frequency traders and market makers, and even then they can use on-chain orders if they want some guarantee on their order placements. Without on-chain orders, even they use short-term orders, typically what happens is that they would just place very aggressive short-term orders that expire within the next few blocks, so you limit the downside of the MVV of your order. Essentially, you're just writing kind of an option and you put it on a book for like the next 2 seconds. Right? And also the MV metrics, which we talked about before, also applies to this as well, because if you maliciously kind of trying to censor some short-term orders placed before the current block, it's also pretty obvious when you measure the kind of discrepancy. There's other ongoing research in terms of future mitigations. One example is to utilize vote extension, which actually recently went live on V4 this past Thursday, which I think makes it the first chain in production to use vote extension, again, with help from the Skip team, so shout out to them. So the higher level idea there is that you can use vote extension to guarantee some kind of, to have some guarantee on the quality of its execution, right? For instance, if somebody pretends to not see an order, or somebody some proposer includes a very bad match for an order, then the other validators on the network can kind of collaborate and attach orders via vote extension to have a better execution for the order, right? And so you can either use this, and this information will be put on chain. You can either use this to slash or punish the proposer, or you can just go the further and then just like further commit the better execution, right? So basically, with that, you have almost just short of guarantees of putting orders on chain, but mostly you have guarantees that the orders will have their original execution. So okay, so again, this is a very brief summary. Open to any questions toward the end. So okay, so this brings us to CosmWasm integration. So the goal of this integration right now is to enable more sources of maker liquidity in long tail markets. It's important to talk about long tail here because the higher cap markets with thick liquidity is not the subject of concern here. The concern here is, again, in a long-term vision of you can launch any perpetual markets on anything that has an oracle price. You cannot always rely on market makers to provide liquidity. You need some additional source of liquidity, whether it's AMM, whether it's like smart contract, right? So in terms of the timing right now, composability has always been on the mind, but again, due to the architecture v3, which is like on a specialized layer 2, which has a centralized order book matching service, it just didn't make sense in investing composability back then. But now with this move to Cosmos, with like a native composability offered by smart contracts and IBC, we're pretty bullish on the future of DeFi applications composability here. So these are the example queries and messages that a smart contract will have access to. This is active in development, so things might change, but on a higher level, you will be able to have oracle price, get the perpetual details, get sub-account stake, get funding samples, basically anything that is committed on chain. And then you'll be able to place safe orders, cancel order, deposit sub-account, and whatnot. So CosmWasm is already enabled in a lot of chains. We're not going to spend too much time to discuss like how we do it because it's basically plug and play. I want to discuss like some interesting concepts that came up when integrating CosmWasm to the MemClob. Right. So the first question is obviously what kind of order do you actually enable it to? So it turns out that you can only place on-chain orders. Because short-term orders, when they are proposed on-chain, the proposer needs to kind of attach a signature for the order to prove that somebody actually placed the orders. Smart contracts cannot sign the orders, so therefore we have to kind of execute some logic and commit deterministically in state to achieve in consensus that this order was actually placed. So this is a quick diagram of how the life cycle of smart contract orders will go through. So on block N, during the deliver TX, the contract executes from the user. It deterministically includes some on-chain orders and committed to state. Oracle price is updated, and then during the prepare check state, which again is where the MemClob tries to reconcile the on-chain state against the off-chain state. This is where these orders are actually matched by the next proposer. If this order actually results in a match, the next proposer will propose this order and put it on chain, and it will just be executed just as any other order on block N+1. So the other interesting thing to discuss here is what knowledge does the smart contract have of the order book, right? Due to the hybrid design of MemClob, a lot of the liquidity is actually off-chain. The smart contract cannot deterministically execute like order placement. So this is actually fine because of the goal of a smart contract that will try to get access to the dYdX order book. In liquid markets, for example, like Bitcoin and ETH, these contracts will not be used to provide additional liquidity because there's already thick liquidity, right? The contracts will only be there to act as takers. And this will be useful for contracts that just want to like take on long or short positions. There's an example that we're going to go through later. But basically, the idea here is that you don't actually try to compete with the market makers in terms of being like aggressive with your order, in terms of placing the best price orders. In long-tail markets where there's actually not absent of market maker, this is where smart contract will shine, and they will primarily be acting as makers where retail users can come in and then take orders from the smart contract. That said, there is potential improvements we can make to kind of improve the experience of smart contract orders. Something being that we can incorporate real-time funding rate strategy, which is actually committed on-chain, into the strategy, right? And these funding rates actually have a lot of implications on what the order book shape looks like. So it will be helpful for the strategy to make better informed orders. We can also potentially commit more order book shape on-chain, right? Gradually, this is just like the problem becomes without putting every single order on-chain, how do you get smart contract the best idea of what the order book shape looks like? You can use vote extension, you can use some proposer-based sampling mechanism to basically give a signal on what the slippage is if the order was to execute. Okay, so next, finally, I'm going to talk about some example applications that can be built with CosmWasm and a dYdX order book. The first one is pretty obvious. It's the market making vault for long-tail markets. We mentioned this before. The vision is that in a world where anybody can propose any markets on dYdX chain, there needs to be some source of liquidity, whether it's from your order book or whether it's some form of AMM. The contract journey will be pretty straightforward. So user just deposit into the smart contract vault and obtain some share of the vaults, and the vault just plays stateful orders every book. Importantly, this strategy can be either on-chain or off-chain. So if you want some off-chain strategies that kind of protects the strategy, you can do that. Or you could do a deterministic on-chain strategy where you could implement some form of AMM, some of the curve. It's up to the contract developers. And the other example that has actually generated quite some interest recently is to build some Athena-style delta neutral strategies, right? So the gist of it, there's a lot of ways to implement this, but one example journey is user can deposit USDC, which is currently the only collateral supported on dYdX chain, into this smart contract vault. The vault then transfers some percentage of this deposit to Osmosis, for example, via IBC, and then atomically swaps for ETH, right? So it has a long position in ETH. At the same time, the vault enters into an equal value short position on dYdX chain to remain delta neutral, and then at the same time fund funding rates. This X percentage can be increased or decreased to kind of tune your leverage vector. So yeah, these are actually the two examples that we're currently working with some developers in the ecosystem, and we're really bullish and hopeful for more developers to come in to build on top of the dYdX order book. So that's actually all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for that. About interblock MEV, I'm wondering if people or you or anyone has considered sort of like an overlay layer on top of the SDK or on top of the blockchain, but underneath the application, that timestamps transactions globally with a decentralized timestamping network, where every timestamper signs transactions along with a hash of the previous transaction chain. So rather than a blockchain, every timestamper makes a transaction chain. And the idea is you submit a transaction and you get a signed thing back from the timestamper, and you know that if you don't get a response back immediately, then something's wrong. And my point is, why don't we try to order transactions globally with a timestamp?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I guess the first response to that is it's generally hard to prove where things are. I guess, okay, if you want users to attach a timestamp and have them sign it, that's okay. But it's still hard to prove that something happens at some deterministic state, right, without kind of putting it on chain. Because anyone can just say that, oh, I placed this order at this particular time and then I sign it, right? And if I collude with a proposer, then it becomes easy to kind of manipulate a timestamp. However, it is a very interesting idea to generally have a better site kind of consensus process which achieves the process of effectively putting orders on chain without actually putting it into the Cosmos SDK, the application state. This is something that actually our research team has looked into a lot. And so it's still in a research phase, but like we've looked into options of like committing like maybe order books somewhere, not on the basically have a sidechain, right, where you can commit the order book somewhere and where you can have a light client and kind of checks that. So you don't really need to kind of use that sidechain for like deterministic kind of state transition. You can just use that as like fraud proof, right? If somebody's like, manipulating the chain and has some kind of NDV, then you basically, it's provable that somebody actually did that, and then you could kind of react based on that. But yeah, generally, we're looking into a lot of kind of similar ways to kind of put orders not directly on the layer 1 chain, but on some other side consensus. Thank you for the question.
Hi, thank you. This was a really interesting talk. Does having the order book sit in memory create an incentive for proposers not to gossip orders, especially ones that might have significant price deltas, so that they can match against them and not really have anyone who can like argue about MEV or anything? Like, is there an incentive here to be like, okay, well, since this is all in memory, and since some of these orders are actually like sort of like paid for order flow value, what if I just like don't gossip them because I want to trade against them when it's my turn? Like, is there a perverse incentive here?
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting question. And generally, I think like the P2P layer of Cosmos, there's like a lot of things. It's pretty primitive, right? It's just basically it's pretty naive. We just kind of broadcast transactions to the entire network and hope for the best, right? Hopeful that everybody sees these orders eventually. So we actually haven't thought a lot about this. But just from a network topology standpoint, there are some ways you can mitigate, right? You can have like full nodes. Like you basically trust the mempool gossip by having a lot of just as much full nodes as possible, right? Because it's not the validators who are just gossiping the orders. The orders come to the network with the full nodes, right? So hopefully, besides, unless a malicious player controls every single node on a network, like it's hard to kind of censor orders and create a partition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you don't have to control every single node. You just have to have a deal with the person running a popular API.
The person running the popular RPC endpoint?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's multiple entry points, right? Like you have to control you have to control all these entry points and have these nodes run like separate kind of logic, right? So yeah, I agree. It's definitely a tech vector. But it's probably less. I would say that it's probably less urgent compared to the other kind of obvious NDV out there. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So do you guys foresee or already see some basically denial of service kind of traffic whenever a proposer node is selected by consensus? All the market participants kind of want their orders to go directly to the proposer, if I'm understanding this correctly. So have you guys, thought about this and actually observed this in production maybe? Yeah, so I guess the question of DOS is that, so yeah, I guess I agree it's true that everybody will try to find the next proposer. I think because dYdX chain is relatively nascent, the players on the network still hasn't fully kind of matured into basically this activity probably hasn't started yet, but I agree it's a very good point, and we should be pretty vigilant about this. Like in the long term, the worst thing that can happen to chain is that it's a very, people basically pay for access to the next proposer and basically have a direct line. You don't want that. You want like a more fair executing environment. So I think that's a good question. I don't have a great answer for you right now, but something that we look into. Okay.
Yeah, great. And I wanted to ask actually about the last point about this delta neutral position or strategies in this case. Is it going to involve some kind of synthetic USDC that can depeg? And a second question, what is expected APR?
Can you repeat the first question?
Is it going to involve some synthetic USD token? Ecina has this USDE, which is basically you need to put USDC or USDT, convert to their fake dollar and give it to them. Is it kind of the same idea or it's something else?
Yeah, obviously that's a good point, right? It has a similar strategy. It's a similar strategy compared to Athena or a lot of other kind of similar stablecoins. obviously, it's up to the developer who develop contracts to do this. But you can make a stablecoin out of this. Or you don't make a stablecoin, you just use some vault where people would just kind of deposit and kind of basically just like have continuous APY. There's different ways you can do this. I think it's a very interesting point, and we're curious to see how people will use this. But yeah, agree that you can definitely make a stablecoin out of this.
Okay, but dYdX not planning to do it. It's like third-party developers should be doing this.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
That you as a company, dYdX, you're not going to provide this strategy, so like some other people should do it.
Yeah. So I guess the bet here. So the bet here to enable CosmWasm is to enable other people in an ecosystem to build on it. As a company, obviously we have limited resources, so I don't know if any short-term or long-term plans to build anything like this. I'm just kind of giving this an example. But obviously it begs the question of if such thing actually has a lot of product market fit, right? And obviously in the long term, you can kind of think about, as a company, I'm sure we can think about strategy in terms of what to build on top of the dYdX order book. But as of now, the top priority is still to build a better exchange at the current moment.
Okay, great, thanks.
Hey Teddy, here.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm curious Okay, I'm not sure. So my question is, what prevents a validator from holding a placed order and just censoring all the cancels on it, and then just like waiting until that price is really stale, and then just like filling it against themselves when they become the proposer?
Yeah. So the question is, this is with respect to an off-chain orders, right? So
yeah.
You have a shorter order placements. You basically ignore or cancel, and then you basically fill it as the most favorable price to yourself, right?
Yeah, just wait until whatever the timeout period is. So 60 seconds or however long it is, and just right at the end, just hit the stale price on your own.
Yes. So this is basically what we discussed when we discussed the MVP. Short answer is no. There's no way that prevents that, right? There's like social layer that kind of mitigates against that. Where again, on the MVP metrics, you can probably see this if somebody's consistently doing this. But basically, as we said before, essentially right now, when market makers are placing very kind of aggressive short-term orders, expiring in the next 2 blocks or 3 blocks, they're basically writing an option, right? To I'm willing to fill this order at this price up until this time, which is why we use good to block compared to good to time, because this gives people more accuracy in terms of short-term, this granularity. But yeah, the short answer to that is no. There's no way to prevent this with short-term orders. But obviously, we discussed this 3 weeks ago. There's ways you can do with vote extensions, where you can kind of have the network kind of chime in, and then kind of either in this case maybe you prove that we actually see cancel orders before, right? So you can build something there. I think it's very interesting, and really I'm excited to see what is there any. Our research team has to think about this for a long term, and I know you guys are looking into this. So curious to see how that
since we talked,
develops.
we figured out how to fix this problem.
Nice.
So
okay, we'll talk. So do you want to answer that or?
Yeah. The way you do it is by having all the validators in the second round, during the vote extension period, just add in as part of their votes whether they have seen the cancel.
Yeah.
And then if more than 2/3 have seen it, then you sort of roll back the place limit. So you have to delay the block execution for the fill by 1 block. And in return, you get guaranteed cancels. Now, you can get the threshold down from 2/3 down to an arbitrary % by using threshold encryption stuff, but that's a separate story.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.